Hi everybody, it's Honest John, and I've decided to go ahead and do a series on mental illness. Now, I'm not going to be able to cover everything. What I'm going to try to do is give a decent summary of the main categories of mental disorders and, just kind of sum it up. I'm going to start off with kind of the basics. Depression. Uh, Now, everybody thinks they know what depression is. Everybody goes, "Oh, I've been depressed." No, no. Depression, as a lay term, means one thing. Depression, clinical depression, is a whole other thing. In most cases, uh, the way a regular person feels like reacting to uh, a really tough day or something like that. It feels bad. It feels really bad, no doubt about it. But you got to multiply that by several thousand in order to get to what depression is, at least in most cases. And there are a bunch of different types of depression. There are reactive depressions, in which a person has an extreme reaction to events in their life. There is what is called melancholic depression. This is sometimes called anhedonism, because even though the feelings of depression are not as deep as they are in the other major depressions, um, the person can get no pleasure, none at all. They may be capable of having sex, but they're not going to enjoy it. Things that they normally find as very rewarding just leave them feeling empty. There is psychotic depression, in which, in addition to the depressed feeling, there are psychotic symptoms such as delusions and hallucinations. And of course, if there are delusions, the delusions will kind of correlate to the depression. So the person will have a delusion that he has done something extremely bad, even though he really hasn't. If they have hallucinations, like hearing voices, the voices will tell them what a piece of shit they are. So that's no fun. There is a fairly rare form of depression called catatonic depression, and I actually helped to treat somebody with this type of depression at one time, a young lady who was totally immobilized. As a matter of fact, you can take this person and move their arms, and whatever position you leave their arms in, they will just stay in that position until you come back and change their position again. Now, the advantage for staff is that if you put the patient somewhere, you know where you're going to find him, because that's where he's going to be. This lady that I was involved in the treatment of, she, when she was discharged from the hospital, she was well on her way to recovery, but she still wasn't anywhere near her baseline. And so she was still fairly depressed. And I happened to run into her a couple of months later when she had completely recovered and was at her baseline. And I didn't recognize her. She was incredibly beautiful. And in all the time that I'd worked with her, I never thought that once, because with the animation gone and the sparkle gone, the beauty was gone. There is postpartum depression, which happens after the birth of a child, and this is the tragedy of this is that the mother and child don't get to bond normally. So that's very sad. There is a seasonal affective disorder in which the patient becomes depressed, usually during the wintertime. And as a matter of fact, the theory is that this has to do with the diminished light. And so part of the treatment is exposing the patient to lights that are meant to make up for the lack of sunshine that happens during the winter. Now, what's interesting is that even though that theory hasn't been proven, it is a fact that the rates of suicide are highest in those countries in the northern hemisphere that have the shortest days in the winter, and that is when the suicide rate is the highest. And there is something called thymic disorder, in which the feelings of depression are not as severe as in the other forms of depression, but it's very persistent. So that rather than having normal baseline where sometimes you're a little bit happier than other days, sometimes you're a little bit sadder than other days, the person is pretty much always sad. The feelings are not as deep as in most of the other kinds of depressions, but very persistent. In general, the symptoms of depression are profound sadness. That's the main one. Usually there's a loss of appetite, but there is one form of depression called atypical depression, in which the person actually, the appetite increases. And it's kind of like the person is doing comfort eating. And they tend to gain a lot of weight, which doesn't do their self-image any good. But most of the time, the person loses. Most depressed people just don't have much of an appetite. They don't, and you have to, when you're working with them, you have to kind of push them to eat. They also will have difficulty sleeping, constipation. And constipation is a big one. As a matter of fact, one of the ways that you know that they're starting to get better is if they start having more regular bowel movements. Lack of motivation, and in many cases, suicidal ideation. And that's the biggest risk with depression, is the risk of suicide. And so you have to, and especially when they start to get better, is when you have to watch them, because they're still depressed, but their energy level is rising, and before they might not have had the energy to try to commit suicide, but as they start to get a little better, even though they still feel bad, their energy level is up. So it's the most dangerous time, and staff have to be very, very alert when they're treating this. Fortunately, there have been many advances in the medications used to treat depression that are very, very effective. And the thing that you have to do is match the medication with the type of depression that you're dealing with. So diagnosis becomes really important. And of course, electroshock, which developed a very, very bad reputation in the early days of psychiatric hospitals because it was used badly and as a punishment. But it is a really effective treatment in certain types of depression, and it's done in a way that is totally not traumatic. And as a matter of fact, they've even refined it to the point where they're not just shocking the whole brain; they're sending the electrical impulse into those areas of the brain that are involved in emotions. Behaviorally, the staff's job when they're treating depression is to keep the patient active. Being active is a very, very important factor in recovering from depression. And of course, the patient doesn't want to do a damn thing. So you are cajoling and encouraging and also being a bit of a bully and making sure that the patient goes to all their activities, especially exercise. Get them up, exercise, very important. But also, every other activity, occupational therapy. Man, if you can get a patient to make a tile ashtray, that is like a major victory. And then, as far as in their group therapy and individual therapy, you try to encourage the patient to express emotions, especially anger. Depression may be experienced by the patient as sadness, but the best way to summarize depression is it's anger turned inwards. Thanks for listening.